Well, we've seen Octalysis bring out the Diva. We've seen them bring out just about everything that they can. Just when we think they're going to play standard, they bring out the Valeera. It doesn't matter what you think they're going to bring, they will bring anything. For simplicity, they brought a lot back in game number 2, but they still find themselves down 2-0 as we enter game number 3, and whether Octalysis can close it out.
I'm prepared to label them the anti-meta at this point. I want them, they are the anti-meta until they decide to deviate, or either stick to the norm and, decide we're going a step back, we're going, but as long as they're bringing out these wild picks, constantly getting that deviation, they are the ones, they make the meta through breaking the meta here.
Well, battleground number 3 will be Infernal Shrines, as we're going to see what possibly could come next, because Simplicity, they're still favoring that first pick slot Dread. But for Octalysis, if they're picking the battleground, they've got a strategy prepared for it.
And Infernal Shrine's one that's pretty diverse in the approach here to it. We talked about it a little bit in the last series. It's a battleground that really doesn't limit too much when it comes to those unique picks. Very many playstyles available. The large reason for that, why, for anybody maybe wondering why I say that whenever talking about Shrines, is it's one of the few battlegrounds that the battleground objective spawns. I don't really have to fight, and I can still make an argument objectively that shot-calling-wise, that's going to gain me more than it actually loses you, right? And there's a couple other elements when it comes to the wave clear and things like that around that shrine. You talked about the waves of 10. It's pretty problematic, but that is why Infernal Shrines is one of the more diverse maps.
Well, we saw Team Freedom just recently last weekend on Infernal Shrines basically do everything but fight on the objective for a long while. Today, they had a very different approach where they focused fully on the objective, didn't find the value until a later part in the game, but things like that do come to mind as there are diverse playstyles on this and very diverse metas. As we know, Alexstrasza was kind of born on this map where people are like, wait a minute, Alexstrasza Dragon Queen so strong. So that can come to mind when we look at these, but it opens up so many different playstyles that could potentially be yet to be seen. Maybe the return of Sylvanas.
JL, we've gotten ourselves a lot of Genji today, but I'm amazed at how little Whitemane has actually made herself into the battleground here today in week number 2. I thought we would get a little bit more after week 1, couple teams favorite, couple teams not. I mean, even if there were changes going in, I didn't feel like they were devastating enough to put her into that kind of position here. And this is a battleground where I'd like to see her come to light here. Maybe one of these two teams. I say that, but we've also got more Karazim and had some of our Karazim players kind of showing in day number 1 here. So that could be part of the reason. But Hammer is the ban now for Octalysis.
So with this draft, Maiev Medivh have to be either banned or they'll potentially be let through. It's a matter of, does Simplicity have the comfort factor? They're banning Medivh, putting the onus of banning Maiev on Octalysis. We know K1 Pro has had value. It's very easy to get tether value in and around the shrine. So I think Simplicity would be more than willing. It's a matter of, is Octalysis okay with that, dealing with that style of play, one that they are very comfortable playing themselves?
It's going to be interesting too when considering some of the warriors, at least for Simplicity. Maiev is banned, so not an option there for K1. But between with Diablo banned out, how high does Murden fall in these situations, especially with a first pick Deckard here for Simplicity? But how far does the Murden fall in this list, right? Because Murden he's not bad on Infernal Shrines, but I wouldn't say it's actually one of his better ones, purely on these little things keep spawning in the way of my Stormbolts, and that's the targets I want to kill. And just with Johanna, kind of throwing out the table, we haven't seen too much. Oh, wow.
I was going to say, Abathur's let through, and this is something where if you do just want to be different, this is where it's at.
And normally when we get an Abathur, because he isn't let through that often on battlegrounds where he gains value, this is one of those situations where having it with a Genji on top of it, that is already a lot showing, not so much in the macro focus, a lot in the skirmish focus. So if you are in Infernal Shrines and you are Simplicity here, you immediately go, I'm worried about macro. I need to find a way to get away from the skirmish. That shows interest towards it with the Dahaka pickup for the offlane. It's going to be one of the best tools to survive on a Genji Abathur gank in an offlane, but there still needs to be more here. Looking towards the ability to manipulate the battleground and not have to trade into that Abathur Genji.
Well, the Dahaka also takes care of potentially Abathur pushing. The thing that interests me, again, I can't stress enough how impactful Draded was on LFM in Phase 1 on the Genji. It was world-class numbers on a team that struggled for wins. We saw them play an Abathur the other day. It ended up being a mix-up because Justin, former Abathur main, ended up having a warrior in the middle of that. With Genji, is it a Prismat going to be playing that with Draded on Abathur? Is it vice versa? Or does Justine get in the mix? With Octalysis, anything is possible. So it's always kind of interesting to see, what do I ban?
Yeah.
I mean, they could do anything.
This is one of those weird moments where, based on how confusing the draft priority has been by Octalysis, it puts it in a position where you go, is that even the solo support, right? Is Bud somehow flexing his way over to the Abathur, and Justine is going to be on that off laner, or off hero compared to what we expect? Or is Justine kicking it back to his classic Abby for us in the squad? At this point, I don't even feel like I should have the right to say anything over these next two picks. It's just going to be like Octalysis.
Well, the Valera also, by the way, potentially could be here. If they are going to run solo support, the elements that you always see with solo support Abathur comps are self-survivability and mobility. Raynor, self-heal plus armor at level 4.
Yeah.
Well, bonus armor at level 4. But you get the healing already. Johanna, self-heal. The Condemn, the Iron Skin able to walk away. Genji, mobility, and a deflect. So they do have the elements around that solo support Abathur.
They do definitely have the elements. But again, the macro concern is definitely something that's got to be a little bit here for simplicity. We'll find out. Gleaming Tychus, interesting selection coming out from them, but these two actually used to be a really common Korean duo. The thought process more often than not behind it, especially when you have a weak support. It's something that doesn't have a burst steal like Uther or Rhaegar would be, you just go the bigger they are. Li Ming immediately gets a reset after you put him down below 25% HP, and you just blow up the fight in that manner. Stukov should not have the burst healing to be able to deal with that, but in theory, Lurking Arm is a tool that could be used to kind of stop that all-in capability here.
I mean, is this a meta comp? I mean, it's not solo support Abathur, so it's not too wild.
It feels
Abathur Genji, we know, has...
It feels like it is, but at the same time, it's kind of not, in the sense that, like, the support with the Abathur Genji and the Warrior, none of them are on the same tone of like how they want to approach it. Like Stukov doesn't aid Genji that well when it comes to his mobile healing.
Yeah.
Johanna, wants to play it a little bit slower with the Stukov, but Genji's going to be diving deep. And then you don't have the argument is, well, we have a solo support Abathur. Well, that's not really the case here. So I look at this and I go, it's definitely more in the meta vein, not as anti-meta as we would like. And I don't know. Honestly, I have a little bit of concerns for Octalysis committing to the Abathur as early as they did with the Genji and then not necessarily dominating the macro. I'm not sure Simplicity has the tools, but I do think this might be more competitive than the first two games.
Well, the Muradin, Li Ming definitely have some obstacles in the way to fire off some skill shots. But from a draft standpoint, I think Simplicity, this might be their best chance yet, as we're ready to head into game number 3 here to see if Simplicity can hold and whether Octalysis can finish this out. But the Li Ming, we know the blow-up potential of a K1 Pro Mage. One of the best Li Mings, Dredd. I remember you and I looking back kind of around HGC started, but we had access to some stats before, and it was always K1 Pro's Li Ming, arguably one of the best in the world statistically at the time in his heyday. And then, of course, the Tychus on this battleground in particular, with those grenades, very, very strong to help control the objective.
Yeah, it's again, based on that theory of like knowing that they're going to spawn in bulk, right? Everybody kind of whittles them down. Tychus has one of the best ranged immediate nukes that just go, thank you, for a small set of those, 4 or 5 coming in. And Tychus, this is kind of his battleground, really is one of the few that he has remained meta for. And a lot of it is his control and fight around the shrine itself, and then being able to force the siege with the Punisher, an objective we look at and we go, doesn't always gain the most value possible. I really actually like Simplicity's composition minus Infernal Shrines, and it's purely the Li Ming. I just go, I
it's
get
more difficult.
I get the Tychus Li Ming, and I get the thought process, soften him up. Li Ming goes, here's the dominance value, but I just don't know if, again, on this battleground, it's going to have the setup that they would desire to have. But beyond that, I really do think they have a lot, and Octalysis started that, their own anti-meta kind of flavor, and then quickly went to like, maybe we're going to play this a little bit normal.
It seems more normal than what we've seen the last 2 weeks. The one hero that we saw come out at Eastern Clash, we saw it earlier today in Europe, on this battleground is where it really started to come in, was another mage style, Kael'thas. Kael'thas extremely susceptible to dive until he finishes his level 1 quest, which is an uncapped talent with his Mana Addict. You get the shield. After you have 20 globes, it obviously gives you that bonus mana, but you get a shield equivalent to your max mana. So it does help you survive against dive in those situations. So it has been a different option we've seen on other teams so far. Maybe it's something that, because it's been so far out of the meta, maybe not as practiced recently. The one other thing that it can do as a Genji player, you've seen Genjis go against that. You hit him with that living bomb. It's like Genji has to make the decision. Am I willing to eat this damage, or is this the moment that I use my deflect for? And it's always kind of that counterplay of, I'm going to try and force that out. You're going to try and force mine out. We'll see who has control. Just something that we might potentially see in other games if we ever do really get the Genji let through, which is very rare.
Yeah, it is very rare. And the Kel'Thas is, you know, since we got it a little bit at Eastern, was the first place. Tempest was one of the first teams willing to break it out. I was immediately like, I love this. Like, I want to see more Kel'Thas. I think that the kill potential that he provides purely through Gravity Laps is a little unrivaled in the support role, and he does a lot of things really right. But I can't help but feel like the more I've watched him at the highest end, it feels like he is only good as a response to opponents that are willing to take the long sustained fight, and then he quickly goes, chain bombs are going to be a problem then. Like, it makes it to where it's like, oh, if you want to take that sustained fight, I'm going to make it really hard for you to do that, rather than that all-in kill potential like we used to kind of know from the Kel'Thas. It's just one of those interesting things since he has been reworked / kind of nerfed over the past 6 months. Yeah,
the threat of a double Genji, though, is always going to be terrifying. It doesn't matter what hero you're on. Li Ming, Kel'Thas, I mean, basically anybody can get it.
Even Garrosh has a hard time with that, and I feel like he's the one hero in the game I go, you know, pretty much set anybody on the other side, and I'm willing to go toe-to-toe with it.
Well, as we've seen, since the changes to Stukov, obviously rework those talents, we've seen more into that Fetid Touch at level 1, getting cooldown reduction, and then the mana cost taken away post 30. So it's a 2-tier quest, 15 and 30.
The small thing I've noted when it comes to that talent is I've really enjoyed it on maps like Towers of Doom as an interrupt tactic.
Super poke.
Yeah, any Cursed Hollow, any channel objective where you can constantly use it as an interrupt opportunity, I really like that new kind of adjustment here. I don't think that it's necessarily a misplay by any means on Infernal Shrines or anything like, but just highlighting those battlegrounds, it really stood out to me so far.
Yeah, we've also seen kind of the coupling of that with the level 7 for the increased range. And so on those poke style, like the towers that you were talking about, or Cursed, you get that extra range on that short cooldown. It's pretty terrifying to deal with because you're just like, can you please let me channel? Stop hitting me.
Well, it's even more so because I think more often than not, you know, very rarely do we talk about some of the elements missing that certain heroes do within their role. And what I mean by that is, how often can you depend on your support for an interrupt to a channeled objective, right? Deckard has 2 very long cooldowns. Malfurion used to be amazing. Elune's Grace, Moonfire, he was an outlier in that department, to where on battlegrounds like Cursed Hollow, he would be, you know, very, very stand out. And because obviously Elune's Grace is no longer, rip in pieces, man.
Thank goodness.
It puts it into a position where it's like Malf is still one of the better ones, but his range is so short that it costs him more often than not. Scroll of Sealing along with the Stormbolt. We do see the passive use there from Buzz to make sure he gets his maximum healing. Not available for Calf. Ooh. Takes quite a bit of damage there out from Prismat on retreat.
Yeah, the return damage, the knockback there from the Rainer was really good, but the threat of Draded, and this is one of the things, is that Dahaka will win out. I think Zun ended up eating a bit more damage than he anticipated from that. But Draded on this Genji, Dread, is insane playmaking, and Justine, he's trying to walk away, is going to be successful.
That was a really smart play by Simplicity, to not commit to that whatsoever. How fast you saw them go, wait a minute, is this Justine out of position? And the second they see the hat, is quick call to get the clear here. Because in the earliest stages of this game, which we already see taking action here on the top half, is the early game macro pressure. I already highlighted it within this draft of Octalysis. Simplicity need to be able to apply as much pressure as possible. Octalysis put emphasis towards that bottom camp, which Draded is kind of escorting up to get value currently. But anything that Simplicity can do to make sure that they are kind of setting that tone and not struggling in the early stages is a must-have for them if they're going to extend this to a game 4.
Both teams going to make a play on the Shaman camp. Octalysis picking theirs up slightly earlier. Will be able to get a start on the objective. We'll see how much of a lead they can establish. Again, that Abathur empowering that potential push will be something to watch out for. You see the mini-map. Abathur has made his home down in the bot lane. We'll use those locusts to push, and you can see Justine at the top trying to clear out, make way. There's some wave manipulation that goes on there on how far and how aggressively you want to push that wave directly into 4 towers. It's another topic for another time, but definitely some play that he's trying to make in that top lane.
Stormbolt along with the drag afterwards. Ironskin now got to be forced over this objective. Lurking Arm already dropped there by Buds. 15 skeletal defenders in the hand of Octalysis. 5 over that of Simplicity. Next wave now just about to spawn. Simplicity able to split it here. Now almost dead even, 20 to 20. Scroll of Ceiling does not land there from Tiger JK, who's very low on mana. Zuna takes some damage. Buzz throws down another Lurking Arm, looking for a reset straighted, but he's going to be met with a drag. Protect ends up being used there. And look at this, survivability from Octalysis. Simplicity, 8 skeletal defenders now away, J-How.
And they're establishing the lead, but here comes the Lurking Arm. Let's see if that's enough to zone out the rest of Simplicity. There's going to be a nice heal coming in there, keeping him alive. Justine's getting bounced around. There's going to be the root. There's going to be the follow-up drag. That's going to be first blood, and 39 to 38. And it will be enough for Simplicity to get objective number 1, Dread.
That was ridiculous amount of focus from both teams. The minute that initiation started, both skeletal defender count dropped. Everybody worried about getting kills onto the heroes. And with Simplicity getting themselves the first blood and this first Punisher, this is a lot of momentum going into their favor. Going to get the siege up, and this is going to bring it back to the macro problem I was talking about a little bit before. The Shaman camp with the split lane off pressure here, losing Dahaka there is absolutely devastating for Simplicity, because they wanted that split lane pressure to snowball this game out of control, and now King Caffeine gets interrupt there on the Condemn. Another kill here. Things go from bad to worse for Simplicity.
They also didn't get that tower down, which since the exchange in terms of experience, the tower in that mid lane, Mule was picked up by Abathur, so we'll be able to control that as we go on. Of course, Justine also on that level 7 talent, picking up Subdue. If you can hit 4 people with your punish, you have that permanent. There's no tapering off of the slow, but just hitting 2 heroes, the amount of slow that you get out of that, we've seen the control of it. It was really, we saw a lot of it start to come out from Caterpillar. It's one of his staples. He likes to run a lot, but we've seen other players around the world start to pick up on it more and more. As long as you can control a few members, that slow there, allowing the likes of like a double Genji to get in there, very threatening.
Laning here for Simplicity on Octalysis, though, has kind of hit a bit of a lull in the downtime. The opener before the first Punisher, Simplicity was the one trying to be proactive, at least in the top half, and I can't help but feel like that one rotation up towards that top half between Draded and the Abathur hat was enough to scare Dahaka to maybe not prep the lanes as well as he did before. With the camp pushing on bottom as well and this invade coming through, this is a pretty interesting choice for Octalysis to be willing to give this up. I can't help but feel like a lot of that is due to, again, that macro fear. They look at this game and they go, as long as we don't get split push elsewhere and they kind of whittle away, chip at the health of the HP like K1 Pro's doing now a lot all over the battleground, we win these fights. So just try and stop that at all costs here, and they're doing a very good job.
One thing that's interesting to me is the level 7 talents. Between Stukov, we don't get the extra range on it. Instead, we get the targeted excision. So whenever you detonated 1 weighted punch to only 1, doesn't matter how many healing, you get a cooldown on your bio kill switch. And that's pretty significant because that's where your burst healing comes in. We see a denial from Emerald on the other side, which denies healing, and it can be targeted. You know, you can reduce that healing. Sometimes it's enough in a snap team fight, but it does bring up the question of that has to be very precise on when you're using that, because getting that cooldown reduction 5 seconds later on the bio kill switch, if it's enough to get another pathogen out and get a heal, all of a sudden the winning trade is definitely on the side of Stukov.
But one thing I do want to raise, since the adjustments to Stukov as a character is why this has gotten so much better, right? Is this talent has always been amazing. The problem is that it's sat next to level 7 increased range. And normally I'd be like, whoa, the Dread, the increased range doesn't equate to a 5-second heal opportunity, but what it does equate to is to the 13 root, which you need to be able to hit a max range W into the level 7 root and then end up using your passive. You can get a huge amount of lockdown. But this was always the other alternative in a lot of situations. It drastically increases your healing opportunity. And since the level 1 isn't there, and you know that the Lurking Arm root playmaking is not nearly as dire, suddenly Stukov more support focused here with the 7.
Dreadnought, you and I casted in Octalysis game with a Johanna and a Hanzo in phase 1.
Falling Sword, boys.
And it was Falling Sword, and we got it again. We're
Let's go!
In. You know what? Justine said, I am making my own meta. Here
Make
comes
it
the
rain.
clone. Goku and Draded on the backside. The double Swift Strike. See if Justine tries to come in. Here comes the Falling Sword. It's going to go down as it stuns 2 members. But Octalysis and team, they're taking the brunt into this Dread.
They are. They're doing just fine here with it, at least for now. Bud's actually getting stunned by a Stormbolt isolation landing as well. Can Juna land the drag necessary? No, the slow is there, but they get the drag onto Draded, forcing out the deflect heal. Coming through with that Abathur shield and hat. Skeletal Defender's now going to be the focus for Simplicity. 15 to 15 here in a couple seconds. And this is where the reinitiation happens, Jay-How.
Well, we're going to see if that can hold Justin and team on the front line. There's the Lornado. It's going to body out Buds, forcing him to use the flailing swipe. That's going to buy him time, but here comes the follow-up. There's going to be the drag, but that's the interrupt as Justin comes in. X-Strike comes down, unable to confirm the kill. Zuna, however, he's going to be the first to fall as he's got no more health to keep him alive. And Tiger JK, he's trying to walk away, Dread.
He is trying to walk away, but he's not going to be able to do so. 8 seconds until that falling sword may be back online. Jay, I'm not going to lie, we brought a lot of hype there to that falling sword, but when it really landed, I sat there and I was kind of like, it's still falling sword.
It's a matter of, look, they're all in. The clone comes out, you can rest assured that the falling sword is going to be somewhere near or right around the same time. There was a minor disconnect there. They ended up making up for it in the long run. The plays, though, by adjusting the slow from that subdue has saved multiple kills there with just that two-man slow alone, keeping a lot of his team safe as we see Octalysis with that 13 talent here. Here's Falling Sword, there's Hosty. Also picked up the extra damage on Punish at level 13. There's the slow, there's the lockdown, that's the kill.
Very well done there from Octalysis. And as you said, you know, the all-in approach here, a lot of people underestimate how difficult it is to deal with double Genji. Trying to deal with a gap-closing warrior now, which Johanna is not normally who we talk about, things like that happen a lot faster and a lot quicker than you would have expected. And now, with this adjustment, it suddenly makes the double Genji composition. When we were in the draft, we raised two concerns. Your warrior and your support don't want to play with the Genji. Falling Sword changes that variable. One of those two does, and her name is Johanna.
Well, Odin is coming out trying to save this keep, but also try and take the fight. The Rainer's Raider eating some of those shots. The minute that falls, it doesn't matter. The keep falls first. Hosty going forward. They're trying to get the lockdown, but Buds comes in with the follow-up, but the silence and isolation is going to be there. K1 Pro with one reset, trying to see if he can find another.
Hosty's going to be able to prep this here pretty effectively, except Draded doing a great job going back there and making sure to get the split. Brushdock coming in. Track down still continuing there. Justing is going to Falling Sword out. Good night, my boys. Isolation, or excuse me, drag not going to even be needed. I was going to say, for a moment there, he might be the Iron Skin, but not even going to hit the drag.
Prismat even tried to body block him in. He's like, wait, what's going on? Oops, my bad. We'll go back the other way. But he's mounted. He gets out of there. But Octalysis Dreadnought, all of a sudden they're up 2 levels after all that and have that keep advantage.
At this point, it's without Simplicity getting a big enough maybe advantage when it comes to the structures. The Avatar extra experience that he provides to the battleground, mainly over that bottom lane, always able to soak that for Octalysis if needed. It does feel like we're hitting a window where if Simplicity doesn't force before the 16, then they find themselves on that long trekked kind of 16, 18, 17, 19 fight, and those are more often than not, when we rely on those, we're kind of painting a picture that is a bit idealistic.
We saw Simplicity in a similar situation on Volskaya. They made some very good plays, especially pushing that top lane, forcing the response. They don't necessarily have the same sieging gray main approach that we saw before, but they do have tools available. The other thing is that it's not necessarily the most condemning part, no pun intended with Johanna here, is that you always have Odin for defense, which is one of the best defensive tools that you have for objectives.
That is a good point, and part of the reason that, you know, Octalysis probably hasn't been able to get a little bit more into the early stages here is just purely off that defensive opportunities. And one thing to keep in mind too is Simplicity, if they can find a way to stall out this clone double initiation that you're watching right here, they can survive and turn these fights. But
oh my god,
they wait no time. And once again, you see the gap closer, double Genji, double reset, and no more Simplicity, at least not Li Ming and Murden.
Look, we know how it works, but to see it unfold and the way that they made, keep in mind that Clone came out, Justin ripped that Falling Sword, and then we saw the follow-up from Buds. There's not a single person on that team that didn't just make a play. That's wild. Like, this is wild to watch. I mean, how do you prepare for this? All of a sudden you show up and you're like, wait a minute, I'm not expecting double Genji Falling Sword. That's the part, is that Octalysis, there's something to be said about, okay, we have a couple of crazy drafts. You look back to Team Liquid last year. We know they're running Lost Vikings Zarya. Eventually, teams adapt to that. But what happens if the variable that you have is constantly changing? That's what Octalysis is trying to bring to us with their playstyle. So it's very different than maybe some of the other adaptations that we've seen.
It's kind of removing the opportunity of, like, know your enemies almost greater than your friends, right, in that kind of situation, because if you can never even understand your enemies, it's very difficult to really ever figure out how to approach here. And 16 without the oh my goodness, is out the window here for Simplicity as we see the all-in attempt number 2 with the falling sword, double Genji. Simplicity falling low, no resets available quite yet there for Drake. It goes in on Dazuna, draws a passive flailing swipe, gonna get pretty good value. Hosi on an island now dealing
he just
with
completed that condemn. He just completed subdue. So now Justin goes from I'm a playmaker with my punish to good luck. I mean, everybody you hit, 80% slow, and it does not decay. I mean, that is crazy value. Very rarely do you see that one finished, by the way. It's fun when it is.
And for anybody, you know, wondering what does that even look like? I mean, it's like old upgraded Rhaegar Totem, to give you an idea. It's not a stun, but it might as well be. Like, it's close enough. The difference between punish at this kind of level and, you know, a stun is, number one, you can control your character, you can cast spells, but you definitely aren't going very far.
Well, Mortar Punisher, one of the easier ones to deal with. Let's see if we get the Odin out. Well, the Odin, excuse me, it was used in that last fight, so they don't have the Odin available, so they just have to stand back, try and deal with this. Nice bait over by Hosty, making sure to use his dash. Their clone is out here. Falling Sword is up, but X-Strike still 3 seconds away. Here comes Falling Sword, though. Falling
Sword, Drake trying to get a reset onto Tiger JK. Lornado already going to be popped. Justin zoning off here. Buds, though, actually getting pulled in. The leap from the Punisher is the real MVP, buying time for Buds to get his passive out and survive this skirmish. J-How, that 3-man leap was value.
That slow there is, we see just an assault. This is the onslaught of Team Octalysis. The O stands for onslaught, and that is exactly what they brought this entire series, doing it their way, in the only way that they know how, and that's in any way they feel like.
Style, maybe the word you're looking for. Swagger, I don't know. I'm not hip enough to really come up with a full list of these words.
I want to, okay, look, this was probably the most standard meta comp we've seen from them outside of one game last weekend. But they come in here and then they're like, but what if we run Falling Sword? And just like, it looks like meta, but we're doing it different.
This deviation from them in this last game is, for me, the most beautiful of them all, because that takes a tool and an element that you often hear me kind of rely on and ask of teams, right? And it starts in drafting. More often I ask it in laning situations for them to adjust, but heroics are always a great place to bamboozle your opponents as well. They don't always expect that kind of thought process. Like, we even did the same thing I guarantee most opponents would do, is you see the Johanna, you go no gap closer for your Genji, that might be difficult. But again, you're willing to change what you do in order to approach that. And Falling Sword has been changed. There's been a couple adjustments to make it maybe a little bit more relevant, but let's be real here. It still doesn't necessarily pack the same generic punch in a lot of cases, but when you need a dive buddy and you've got a Genji and a double Genji behind it, it makes it a lot more realistic here. And so that kind of play and deviation from Octalysis, we see more of that and less of the kind of wild card factor and the more Joker kind of esque picks like we've seen before. And I go, that's the stuff I love to see from Octalysis. I adore that last composition for them.
Even the fight that we got where it seemed like, well, they dove mid-fort. They got 2 behind there. Even Buds was in on the follow-up. I mean, there's just been so much follow-up each step of the way that it's clearly coordinated. It's clearly practiced. It's insane to see the way that this is unfolding for these teams.
It's very difficult, as you've highlighted, to respond to for an opponent. A lot of teams, I think, are going to have a difficult time, and it makes it that much more exciting now, especially after Dizay's results with the series #1. And, you know, some of the kind of upper echelons of North America, when they go up against Octalysis, what does it really look like? Does Octalysis revert more to traditional meta, or do they in fact commit to this, you know, unique approach, or is it what we get in the last game, where it's like sticking to meta, if you will, not that far off, but then adjusting their heroics talent builds to have a very different playstyle than expected?
Well, we get to speak to the mastermind himself, because we got Justin here for the interview. Justin, you're doing it your way, man. Congratulations on the victory today. But tell me, did you just say, hey, look, we're going to draft normal at the end, but we're really going to bamboozle you with the Falling Sword?
I mean, a little bit. I don't know if that's normal. I guess in Europe, the Abathur is pretty normal. But yeah, I mean, I think Falling Sword's underrated. And I think most teams probably get flamed if their tank player suggests it. But mine has to listen to me, so I pick it.
Look, every time I talk to somebody around you guys, it just seems like there's more. There's more. But by the way, there's more. At what point does this chaos end? I mean, there's only so many hours in a day you can scrim. How much of this is your prep in terms of theory crafting versus applying that in scrims to bringing it here? How much of that actually gets through to what we see?
I'd say at this point, we've seen a pretty good amount of what we can do. Part of what our weird strategies are meant to do is if teams have to ban it or play around that, and they give us just a stronger meta comp than we should get because of that, because they have to ban our weird stuff, then we just get a better draft and we can beat them standard. So I just think more teams should probably have some special strategies like this. But yeah, there's more stuff, but it doesn't get too wild.
Well, we have kind of wondered, right, about how this will stack up. With all due respect to the opponents that you've started out here in part 2, they're sitting below you in the standings currently. When you go up against the upper tier, the upper echelon of North America, do you feel like this success can continue? Because when I talked to Milk and Cookies, he said, look, we had a meeting, we've talked to the players, they want to do it their way. It's what worked last year. Does it feel like this is a step in the right direction for your team to work against the upper echelon teams?
Yeah, I think we're in a really good place right now with our strategies and with our scrim results. I don't think that these strategies are only working because we're facing the lower end of the standings teams. I think these strategies have very few flaws in them, and I don't think the other top teams will be able to exploit anything about it.
I'm not going to lie, I'm eager to see where it goes. But before I get any deeper, I'm going to send you over to Dread. So I want to hear what he's willing to ask you about all this.
My question's a little bit weirder, I guess. Mainly it's just because you guys have such a unique approach, obviously, to not only the drafting and approach to just Heroes of the Storm in general as it currently stands. I'm curious as to what it takes to learn from these compositions from a scrimmaging perspective, especially, you know, with the confidence kind of displayed there and talking about the lack of holes that exist. When you do get pressured with these type of comps in scrims, what do you do to make sure you can actually identify the pros and the cons of the composition versus maybe struggle to learn how to play? Because with how diverse they are, I feel like that's got to be a little bit more difficult for you guys.
So we have very specific strategies that we play depending on which map it is. So we'll have like 1 or 2 strategies for each map, and we'll have adjustments we can make if we think the strategy is strong enough. So basically, if they were to pick or ban anything from the last comp we just ran, we could still run a similar comp that would do the same thing that comp does, just with some heroes substituted. So there's really no way to beat it in the draft, I don't think.
Yeah.
And if we do lose a game and it feels like it was draft, then we just go back and we check it, we see if like playing certain meta heroes in place of those heroes would have been better, if it was better to just play standard or not. And if we have to play standard, we do, and that's fine.
And by filling in those meta heroes, does it make it easier to, again, understand like the value and impact of maybe those less relevant heroes when it comes to like, here's what a Murden did, what does a Johanna Falling Sword kind of do in these situations?
Yeah, we can play meta and we can play our weird stuff, and I guess it's basically just what feels stronger. Yeah. And I think that since we can play the weird stuff, it just makes us way more flexible in the draft, so we should get winning drafts pretty much every time. Like the Murden was a more recent thing for us. I haven't played Murden in 2 weeks. Like I just played it today in warm-up because we made some adjustments. We're like, maybe we should play Murden. Because, I mean, he's good. Obviously, he's a strong meta tank, and I mean, it worked when it works, so.
Yeah, no, it was really awesome, and actually, I just want to congratulate not only the victory here today, but the kind of thought process when it comes to the draft and just demanding resources from your opponent is something that feels like it hasn't been too common here in North America, and I'm glad to see you guys kind of attempting to bring it back here.
Well, Justin, with your record, you're sitting at 5-4 after today's victory. We know that it would be almost an impossible climb to get that automatic qualifier spot. You have Endemic on Sunday, which if you can beat them, it does establish you more towards the middle of the road, maybe towards that upper part. When you look at Endemic, obviously that's an important factor for you guys getting into the playoff higher seeding. But when you look forward on your schedule, is it a matter of we need to test our mettle, test our meta potentially against some of these teams to refine it for the playoffs? What's the strategy in the long run when you look at a much tougher schedule going forward?
I think the Endemic set should probably be a pretty easy 3-0 for us. I think they're a little weak right now. Our week after that against Tempo and Heroes Hearth is definitely going to be our biggest challenge, especially because we're not going to be able to practice with them leading up to it, because that's how practice for HGC works. So, I mean, we're just going to refine our meta and make sure that we can still play standard. And we kind of have like our own meta, so I don't think we can really get like banned out of what we want. I don't really think teams can counter it too easily because we don't really leave our draft open to like a percentage chance. Like there's pretty much no like I don't leave the draft up to chance ever where there's a percent chance that they take a certain hero and then we're just totally screwed. Like that doesn't happen. So I think our strategies will work just as well against Tempo Storm and Heroes Hearth as they will against the rest of the teams.
The minute I see you main tanking Murky, I'll know we've gone full crazy. But for now, man, what you're doing is working, and the floor is yours for any shout-outs you got.
All right. Shout-outs to Twitch chat, first of all, very important, as well as shout-outs to Yukai Chow and the Octalysis group, our sponsor. They've been great so far. Oh, you can't really see it, but here's our thing. Shout-outs to them. And, you know, shout-outs to all the fans who are supporting us, and shout-outs to my team for letting us play weird stuff and not flaming each other when we lose with it sometimes.
Well, Justin, we're looking forward to more. Congrats on the victory today. We'll see you again on Sunday.
Thanks, guys.
Dreadnought, we've heard from the mastermind himself, is that there's no limit to what they can do, but they seem to be prepared for anything.
They do. They definitely seem to be prepared for anything. And that's one of those, I know I'm the skeptic that will always, I am very much a guilty until proven innocent type person, right? I'm going to look at this and go, have my doubts. I've seen a lot of teams have that deviation and things like, but based on that, it's less wild, wacky meta, more we're going to draw resources in the draft. And I consider that just strategic advantage. And I look at that and I go, that's something I very easily can get behind, you know, compared to that kind of wild approach and things like. And it was a lot of the reason why I wanted to ask, you know, how do you improve with this? Because I think that's actually one of the more difficult and interesting aspects of what happens there. And I might be, you know, giving a little bit too much focus into the back end of things, but scrims and how you learn from them is something that North America, I can't help but feel like has been a little bit behind. But that process is very advanced.